something that people are deeply, deeply passionate about, and it needs to be right. And, for any institution that touches customers' money or onboarding or anything with their accounts, they really have to realize that there's a person on the other side of that. And the reason that there's a lot of these laws or regulations in place is to protect that customer.
The Digital Banking Podcast is powered by Typhone. Typhone is the creator of Infinia, a dramatically better digital banking platform for community financial institutions, as well as several platform-agnostic, revenue-generating point solutions. Our highly configurable platform and broad ecosystem of third-party partners ensure our entire suite is scalable and extensible to meet the needs of any FI. On our podcast, you will hear host Josh DeTar discuss today's most pressing financial technology topics with seasoned industry experts from every possible discipline.
Your podcast hasn't officially made it until there's ads in it. But this is one you're not going to want to skip past. And, well, if you do, feel free to hit that fast forward 15 seconds button twice. Ever wonder what gives me my energy and enthusiasm during these podcasts? Outside of my relentless desire to learn about, connect, share, and build up community FIs and their mission to support the communities they serve. It's coffee, and lots of it. Now, you want to know what's better than your regular old coffee? How about donating $5 to the Children's Miracle Network hospitals through Credit Unions for Kids every time you purchase high-quality, ethically sourced coffee that also provides living wages to coffee farmers. So if you want to listen to this episode with epic levels of caffeine-induced focus and help kids in need, head to javaforkids.org to learn more and buy a bag or 10. Thanks. Welcome to another episode of the Digital Banking Podcast. My guest today is Law Helie, the General Manager of Consumer Banking for nCino. This has been kind of cool and completely unplanned, but a lot of my guests over the last few episodes have been military veterans. Law is, never say was, a Marine. So I will pause and give him the opportunity to give me an oorah before we can move on.
All right, Josh, just for you, hoorah.
Thank you, sir. Law, like many folks in their late teens and early 20s, was seeking structure and discipline in his life. And when he came to the realization that just partying in college wasn't getting him anywhere fast. And after a 2 a.m. convo at a gas station with a friend in law enforcement, Law said, maybe I should just join the Army or something. To which his friend replied, well, if you're going to do it right. Go be a Marine. Law set out to enlist in the Marines. When they asked him what he wanted to do, he said, quote, travel and blow stuff up. And if that is not a 20-year-old boy's answer, I don't know what is. When they asked if he wanted to search out bombs, on the other hand, he said, heck no. So infantry it was. Now, his time in the Marines took him all over the world, learning many valuable life skills. Notable was the importance of two things in life. One, build camaraderie and deep relationships with fellow humans. A strong bond builds an effective team. And do good. He was always able to do some amazing things in the Marine Corps, like refugee rescue missions that showed him the power and importance of being there to lend a hand. When he left the military, Law took all of 24 hours before needing to find his next purpose in life. And it wasn't long before he found himself working at Bank of America on some cool tech projects back in the mid-2010s, replacing tech from the mid-80s. So you can imagine the transformation that was happening then. Think back to DOS machines, baby. Now, banking and tech really satisfied his desire to keep moving, keep learning, and making an impact. As a self-prescribed workaholic, Law pours himself into whatever he's doing. And he's moved through the banking and tech space, and it gave him a really wide breadth of knowledge in the industry, something he's deeply passionate about sharing and using to provide value to those he serves, kind of hearkening back to that heart of service entrenched in him from his time in the Marines. So after over 20 years in the industry, having learned the entire alphabet soup of acronyms, I get a chance to pick Law's brain today on all sorts of topics, ranging from maybe marriage advice from someone who's celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary to probably more likely. Things like loan origination evolution to competing in a digital financial world where we have distinct groups of generations and their own very different upbringings around technology, and therefore what expectations they have when interacting with banking tech. So we got lots of good stuff to cover. Law, appreciate you taking some time to join me, sir.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You know, I do. I think it's really interesting how like this industry is so big and complex. And, you know, if you put fintech into a category, I mean, there's a lot of things that could fall into that, right? And so this industry can be really big, but at the same time, it's really small. And it is just really cool over the last little bit. I feel like I've had a bunch of different folks that have these different interconnections, and just a bunch of folks with military background, which is kind of cool. We're you know, I don't know when this will actually air, but we're coming up on Memorial Day weekend. So I don't know. I was thinking about that as we were preparing for this. So one, I want to say thank you, appreciate your service, and
Yeah, thank you.
again, thanks for coming and joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Excited.
So I think it'd be cool to kind of start by just talking a little bit back towards, you know, your journey through the banking ecosystem. Because, you know, when you and I kind of got first introduced, we were just talking through, you know, like I said in my intro for you, is just amassing this breadth of knowledge and how you end up with the acronym soup of like being able to understand all these wacky acronyms in our industry, from everything from, you know, compliance and fraud and risk to technology. You know, how did that happen for you? Like, what was that progression like?
Um, yeah, I mean, you know, I was actually really fortunate where I was able to get hired into Bank of America's management program. And, you know, they do a really good job of onboarding folks and getting exposure to, you know, all the different facets of the financial institution to an extent. And I was hired into their retail banking team. So I managed a branch up in Newport, Rhode Island, and a couple of branches up there from time to time. And, you know, you move through the system and you have to start learning just the, you know, the operational part of it behind the teller line, the online, when you're opening up accounts. And so the platform side of it, and then you start to get introduced to all these things around KYC and KYB, and then and then continue training and things to look out for as it starts to relate to some of the other compliance issues. And, you know, it's definitely something that, you know, you can read a lot about, you can see articles. I mean, there's plenty of things that are out there, but, you know, when you are in the branch network and you're dealing with customers every day, it kind of puts a personal touch to it, right? Because, you know, we had fraud issues. I mean, we had, you know, luckily no one, you know, attempted to rob us or anything like that, but we definitely had customer impersonation stuff and all the steps that you have to go through to secure your customer's account, to secure your branch, make sure your people know, you know, what's going on. And, you know, that was really the foray there was getting trained up and getting exposure to the branch network. And one of the things that Bank of America was great at, you know, when you start, is they kind of have you hop around to all these other branches. And I was up in Rhode Island, which is admittedly a small state, you know, and you can fit a lot of them in other states. But it's a pretty diverse state as it comes to cities and towns, and there's beach towns, and then you've got obviously Providence, and then which is, you know, large city for Rhode Island, you know, and the capital up there, and then you've got some of the other towns in and around, like Middletown and East Greenwich and all these other places. And you get some exposure to like different folks and different problems that the branches are solving. And the more and more you get into it, you start to have a better understanding of not only just, you know, the customer needs, but how the bank runs its business, things to look out for, the compliance aspect of it. And then as soon as you start getting into home lending, everybody in the industry's favorite acronym, which is TREAD. You know, anytime the Fed takes TILA and RESPA and got to put them together and creates a whole new acronym out of those, that makes it super exciting to dive into. And then, you know, all the disclosures that come with it. I mean, you're moving people's money, something that people are deeply, deeply passionate about, and it needs to be right. And, you know, for any institution that touches customers' money or onboarding or anything with their accounts, you know, they really have to realize that there's a person on the other side of that. And the reason that there's a lot of these laws or regulations in place is to, protect that customer. And coming through '08 and the acquisition of Countrywide and a lot that went on during the '08 financial crisis, there was a lot of due diligence, there was a lot of audits, there was a lot of, internal training on how to, stay compliant, what this looks like moving people over. And then when institutions buy another one, sometimes there's always a lot of, the press can be favorable or unfavorable as to why these things happened. And then, customers are, it's a deeply personal thing to them. So really kind of, navigating that was really interesting. And then coming out on the other side of it, you learn a lot. And, you get opportunities in some of those larger institutions to do things like audit ride-alongs, and you start to see, the back end of how some of those things work. And it gives you a lot of exposure. It's a great place to start in the financial industry, unless you're going directly into trading or, securities or something like that, because, that really is sort of the heart and soul of the financial institutions is you've got deposits, you've got customers, you've got relationships. We're in the community. How do we serve the community? How do we keep our customers' money safe? Dealing with the regulatory bodies, and then, there's just a lot. I mean, that's a whole topic, really. I mean, for everything you can get into. But I mean, that segued itself over into, some other opportunities, and I was happy for the time that I spent there. I learned a lot. Still have some great contacts there. There's a few folks that I worked with that have moved up, the ladder there, and happy to see their success. And, they're working on a lot of very cool things over at Bank of America now. And there's some great folks over there.
It's, as you were talking, I think that's one of the things I find really interesting about our industry, right? Is, we have a running joke between me and one of my colleagues about, the weather forecasters. Right. And like, especially here in Portland,
Yeah.
Man, that's got to be a tough job because I mean, the weather patterns can change so much in a day,
Yeah.
but at the same time, if they just say it might rain today, they're probably right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's funny is like the joke we make is that, they probably get their job right maybe 20% of the time. And it's like, could you imagine if I got my job right 20% of the time? Like, I'm pretty sure I get canned real fast.
Oh, yeah.
But like, to the weather person in Portland, they're like, I'm batting pretty good,
Yeah.
And and the point I'm making with that is if you think about as a consumer, right, of weather data, let's say they get it wrong or they screw up. Maybe like my picnic is ruined because we planned it outside, but it ended up raining or something like that. Now, granted, we're, let's leave aside maybe some massive natural disasters or something like that. But by and large, it's not going to really change much for you if the weather's wrong, right? It's pretty navigatable. But like if somebody screws up at the bank and your money just happens to disappear or, happens to be a lot less than it was supposed to, we got issues.
Yeah.
And so just the expectations that consumers have with financial services is 100% right, 100% of the time. Nothing is my problem. Nothing is my fault.
Yeah.
And, especially for the industries that we kind of serve in community financial institutions, like the people that we work with, the people that work at these community financial institutions, they really care about that. Like they deeply care personally about, the health and success of, the financial state of the people in their community that they serve. And so they take that on as like a personal burden almost to be 100% right 100% of the time. And then you just think about the evolution that's happened in our industry. And it's like, man, just going back to what you were talking about with even things like, fraud and security and, thankfully our branch was never robbed. Like, well, back in the day when all we had was, gold coins, like that was the only way to fraud somebody was you had to rob them or you had to steal them. Like you had to hit them over the head with a club. So there was like a certain, threshold that most people just didn't cross to do that.
Yeah.
And now today, like it's so crazy to do this all digitally. You never have to look somebody in the face. You could do it at scale. I mean, it's just a totally different world we live in now. But the expectation from consumers is still like financial services got to be 100% of the time.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it's, it's really interesting. Even some of the most laid back people I know, as soon as something's wrong with their money, they turn into different people.
Yeah.
And, serving in those communities, I mean, you're right. I mean, it used to be a very, arduous process to try and defraud somebody or impersonate someone because you didn't, your channel was you had to walk into the branch. And, it's very clear if the person on your driver's license doesn't match you or, because they are so embedded in those communities, right? You typically know your regulars. I mean, we knew our regulars who'd come in every month and, need certain things. But technology's definitely, put a spin on it. And,
Yeah.
You've got skimmers, you've got impersonators, you've got, all sorts of stuff. And it's wild. It's wild out there for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, just thinking about there's so many different ways that you can interact with money now, so many different ways that it moves that, I mean, the number of opportunities and combinations of ways that you can try and go after somebody's money is ridiculous.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, you see it in those, I mean, it's one of the things that, the branch network, you deal with it all the time. I mean, everything from check fraud to, impersonations or somebody paid the wrong person or elder abuse was always like a tough one, you have folks in homes and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, it's you got to be super, super due diligent. And now that you can, hack passwords and transfer money and, the banks have done a good job about putting, zero liability on there for charges that you haven't done, but there's still a cost to that. I mean, fraud last year, it just keeps going up. Now with call centers and, sort of voice cloning and all these other, mechanics that are out there, it's harder. It really is. And the banks are in an unenviable position of having to, stop all this stuff. And to your point around technology, I mean, you've got populations of the citizenry that, didn't grow up with it. And then you've got, folks that have never known a life without it. And kind of, folks like my generation, which is sort of in between where, we didn't have it growing up, but you kind of came into it in your late teens, early 20s, and, it just becomes a natural part of life. So yeah, it's challenging for sure.
Yeah, I know. And, going back to the fraud side of things, right? Part of the problem is just people themselves, right? And they're so willing to participate in fraud. And it's like thinking about the generational element of technology, I'm like, man, some of you did not grow up in an age where you got emails from a Nigerian prince promising you $10 million and it shows. Like,
sure. For sure.
You know?
Yeah, no, for sure. There's actually a funny article, like sometime in the last couple of years where they went into some house that was abandoned by this couple from Nigeria and there was millions of dollars in cash in there. So like the joke of the headline was there really was a Nigerian prince with millions of dollars that needed to do something with it. Yeah, it's I'll see if I can find it for you and send it to you, but it's pretty funny.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so many of us, I think there's, multiple challenges to it. One is, people that don't understand that it is fraud, right? And are truly falling, to the scams and things. But at the same time, I mean, there's even people like you and I that just, I mean, we work in this industry. I understand the scams. I can spot a scam, usually a mile away, but I'm also moving a million miles a minute. And, you see just how they're able to leverage technology, and some of these scams are so simple, right? I mean, to the point, literally, I was waiting for a package that ended up showing up this morning for my son's birthday. And it was coming from like a freight distributor.
Oh.
And I got him like he's like outgrown his Power Wheels that he has just worn the wheels off of. So I got him his first like electric go-kart.
Awesome. That'll be
So it comes in a crate, right? So they had to drop this crate off, and it comes from this freight carrier. So it's not FedEx or UPS. It's not something I'm expecting. And I got this totally random text message that looks super, super spammy. And it's like, click on this link, to schedule your delivery of your package and stuff like that. And you're like, man, that could 1,000% be a scam.
Mm-hmm.
And just have hit me at the right time. And they had no idea I am expecting a freight delivery.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, it took me a solid like 10 minutes of digging just to make sure, like, hey, is this really it before I go clicking on this
Yeah.
link? But if I'm just moving too fast, I'm like, yeah, I need to get this. I'm in the middle of a work call. Like, I just want to get it scheduled. And I click the
Mhm.
link and I follow through and I put my info and, now I've gotten had.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just the threat surface is mind blowing these days.
Yeah. I mean, furniture's the same way. I had a couch delivered a couple months ago and I got the same random. I'm like, I don't know who this is. They're like, click here to give us your information. And I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do that. I called. I was like, oh yeah, I ordered a couch. Let me call. Then I'm with you. It's hard. And I mean, a lot of folks, they just don't know. And, they're not expecting it. And I think that's, we just have a different level of exposure in this industry than a lot of the other folks do. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's tough. I mean, people get scammed out of a lot of money.
What's your thoughts on, I mean, it creates an interesting challenge, I think, for the financial institutions, especially like the smaller community financial institutions,
Hmm.
where, you have a member of a small credit union who willingly participates in fraud. And it's like, man, at what point do you start telling these folks, like, sorry, but if we keep operating at a loss, paying out for all this fraud that you guys are participating in, like, we're not going to be around anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and, so they're kind of caught in between this rock and a hard place of, like you were saying from earlier, like we as an industry have always stepped in to take care of people and to safeguard their money for them and to be a trusted, partner for them in their financial lives. And now it's like, man, if you're walking up to an ATM and pulling out cash and handing it to the person, if you ask me, like, handing them your digital banking credentials and giving them the OTP and
Hmm.
it's like, man, at what point are you liable for this stuff? But at the same time, how does that, going back to what I was saying, you got to, people who are deeply entrenched in the mission of helping at the financial institution puts you in a rock and a hard place. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to a couple things. I mean, it comes down to consumer education, which I think there's been a lot more of over the last years. You see scam alerts. I know I get texts from, a couple of institutions that I have that will be like, hey, new scam, we'll
Mm.
kind of briefly describe it. Things to be on the lookout for when you log into your online banking. I always kind of get those little pop-ups like there's certain scams on the rise, things to be particular of. And I think that it comes down to like two things. Like, what was the manner of the transactions? Like, I thought it was a legitimate service. I used my credit card. It turned out to be a scam. I can't get the money back. I mean, there's really nothing that the consumer has sort of done wrong. And there was no sort of, it's just a standard transaction. But I mean, to your point, like if you have someone who's like giving people information to access their online banking or to move money, I mean, they should probably be thinking about that. It's like, what does that really look like? And there's probably some culpability, not culpability is probably not the right word, so let's not use that word, but there's probably some education that the merchants can do on the other side. I ordered I had to replace a stove recently, and I went to Lowe's and bought a stove, and they were like, hey, you're going to get a text message from this number. This is who it is. Here's what they're called. And they give you a little sheet of like what to look for.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes, like if these people call, this is a legitimate enterprise. They're going to schedule your delivery.
Huh.
And that helps. And in those text messages, subsequent text messages that I got, it was like, this is regarding your Lowe's order. And I'm like, okay, like I know what this is. So, I was aware, but I think a lot of it comes down to education. A lot of it comes down to, I think if financial institutions stop kind of providing those guarantees there, you're probably going to have folks that, flocked institutions that continue to do so. I mean, it
Yeah.
is, I don't know if you remember kind of like when the internet shopping became like a huge thing, there was sort of this, well, you should get a separate checking account for your internet purchases in case it gets hacked. But really you're just better off using a credit card, because you've got liability on there and obviously, that covers you a little bit more and you have additional purchase guarantees there. And a lot of times extended warranties on some of those items, for legitimate purchases. And I think just kind of understanding like, how to perform that transaction is in your best interest. And what safeguards are there in place. But I do really think it comes down to education and I don't think, policy there is going to change around protections for consumers. And I think that, that the track record of the industry there, gives consumers confidence to continue, banking with those institutions. And of course, there's limits to it. I mean, you have the regulations around when you can file a claim for things. You can't come back to me for something you did last year. It's like a 90-day window post the transaction. So it also means as consumers, you have to be a little more diligent about, your budget and keeping track of your funds and seeing where you spent money and where's it all going to. And, which is another education piece. I mean, I've got teenage kids and, they're out driving, they're doing different things and, making sure that they're keeping track of where they're spending their money. Did you spend X amount of money here? And I will say that a lot of the, institutions are getting better about recognizing fraud right off the bat. I had, I think it was Chase called me a couple of weeks ago. They're like, you weren't in like Palo Alto, California last week buying something for $19.99. And it's like, no. So they just kind of blocked, and they were great. They're like, hey, this is clearly fraud. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. We're going to get you out a new card. It'll be there in like 5 days or something like that. So I think there's a couple, there's an industry there. They want to help, they care for their consumers and their customers, and they want to make sure that, they're protected and they offer that, liability to make sure that those things are taken care of. And I don't really see that going away. But I think education's a big part of it, and it's generational, I mean, my kids get text messages and they're like, this is clearly spam. And I'm like, yes, but there are some more sophisticated ones out there that they just don't have their phone number out there yet. So, they're not getting them.
I had a recent experience with that where I was like, it's pretty cool to see it work, but at the same time, it shows you kind of the limitations of the technology. And last week, I had one of those work trips from where, and it was just good old American Airlines decided they wanted to pull the rug out from under me at every step of the way. And at one point during the day, because I wasn't 100% sure where I was going to end up in the next 4 or 5 hours, I had a hotel. Yeah. It's 3 different hotels in 3 different states, like with significant geography between them.
Yeah.
Right. And over the course of 3 days, ended up all over the place. And the final stretch, I'm headed home from DCA to Portland. And I'm walking through, and they have a Lego store in there. And I grabbed just a little Lego set for my son. And my card got declined. Right?
Yeah.
And I laughed because I was laughing the whole time. And I was like, I bet you anything my card provider is like, what is this dude doing?
Yeah.
Like, he clearly cannot stay in all 3 of these hotels at once.
Yeah.
Like, but it was just funny that it was like across the board, man. Like, I had no problem. I took a customer out to dinner, had a large bill. Like, I went, and stayed at one of the hotels, canceled one of the others, had to keep another one because I'd missed the cancellation window at that point. Everywhere, card works just fine. It's the like $23 charge at Lego they got.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was nice because I immediately, I tap my card, it gets declined.
Yep.
I immediately got a push notification on my watch that said, was this you? I said, yes, it was. It said, great, your transaction has not gone through, but you've not been charged. Ask the merchant to redo your charge and tap your card again. It'll work this time. Told the merchant, they reran the transaction, tapped the card, approved, out I went. Right. So it is cool to see the system kind of working, but it does show that, I mean, it's never going to be 100%. And it's never going to be 100% in, eliminating false positives like that one, like that really and truly was me. But at the same time, it's never going to fully eliminate all of the fraud. And so there is an element of, trying to get as many layers in place as possible to protect consumers, everything from the technology side to, like you were saying, the education side. And no one of them is going to get to everybody, right? And probably the hardest one is the education part.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that, it's funny having kids in high school. It's interesting where there are 2 separate schools, even though they're both in high school. And my daughter's school undertook this financial sort of training waining is probably not the right word, but exercise where it's sort of like, hey, like, here's a budgeting exercise for you. So pick a school, pick a job that you think you're going to get, research the salary, go to ADP, figure out, what your payroll taxes are going to be, how much you're going to have to live per month, figure out where you want to live, and kind of go through this whole budgeting process.
Yeah.
Find a bank that you want. They wanted them to go out and get flyers and do all this stuff. Really, I was like an Uber driver for the day, but it was, a really interesting exercise to kind of like put it together and see them how to do it. Where conversely, they did it with my son in his senior year, and I think I would prefer it in their freshman year, or even if it was a project that they built upon throughout, their high school, because, it's complicated, and a lot of times kids get off to, colleges, and we used to work a lot of, open house events for schools where kids are coming in. It was their first day. They needed a checking account in the area. Not all banks are everywhere. So, and there was such a varying degree of understanding of, financial, I guess, mechanisms, but, here's your checking account. This is what direct deposit. Here's a debit card. Difference between a debit card and a credit card. You gotta have to have the money, all those types of things. I think that the earlier we get kids into that and learning those types of things and budgeting, it was huge. You see a lot out there today. You look at where consumer debt's sitting, and, the rise in consumer debt and charge-offs, and just sort of exponential growth there over the last few years. And I think teaching people how to manage their money properly is cool. Certainly a good foot to get people started on, as they move out of high school, whether it's college or trades or just straight to work. And then, reinforcing a lot of the security parts of it. I think one of the greatest things was now you get the text message with the OTP, and you can just kind of click on it to put it in. You don't have to go searching for it. There's even a nice little disclaimer on there that's like, this was sent to you. Do not give this to anybody. Do not, we'll never ask you for this code if you call us, like all those types of things. I think it certainly helped, but I mean, just because it's helped, it doesn't mean that, it's going to go away. Fraud just gets more sophisticated. I mean,
Yeah.
people are very creative, and, a bunch of time of mine was spent in sort of the BSA space and AML, and working with a lot of the, risk officers installing those programs. And I mean, they had these stories, and I mean, they were just wild how creative people can be when they're trying to get around the system or exploit the system, or even like how they're, like laundering money and these types of things. It's very, very interesting, for sure. And there's a lot that can happen out there. So, educating the people is the best thing you can do. And I think the banks, credit unions do as much as they can there, but, can always be better, right? I mean, and for merchants too.
Yeah. Well, and kind of back to that education and just the difference between generations and kind of what you're taught. I mean, what needs to be taught is so different too, right?
Mm.
Like you think about how hard it was for our parents to spend money
Mm.
compared to how easy it is for kids to spend money today,
Oh yeah.
right? The amount of parents that I've talked to, Law, and I don't know, maybe you're going to confirm this too, amongst your kids, but the amount of parents I talk to that have like 14 to 20-year-old kids that have absolutely no idea, if you ask them, how much they've spent on like Uber Eats, and they've just lost the understanding of the value of the money.
Yeah.
Right. Like I was talking to our CEO Siba about this, and he was laughing, and like this is what started the whole conversation for him and I on it, was he was talking about his daughter. Sorry, Devika, if you're listening to this, which I don't think you are, but I know mom does. But so, he was talking about how he was like having a conversation with her. He's like, hey, what was this like $27 charge on Uber Eats?
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, I got a burrito from Taco Bell.
Yeah.
Right. And you realize you're like, holy crap, she paid $27 or whatever it was. Right.
Yeah.
For a burrito from Taco Bell. That's like $1.99.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And when you add all of the fees and the delivery and the tip and the this and the that, and all of a sudden you're like, man, was that really like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think we can all agree at certain times of the day and, certain circumstances, a Taco Bell burrito's worth $27, but most of the time it's not worth $27.
No, you're not wrong. I mean, I think it's, it's one of the things where I used to, when I was a kid, they give you cash if you needed to go something in the store, now it's, Apple Pay or Apple Cash or, some other digital means, because you can just tap your phone, right? Less to lose, easy to keep track of. And, yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot of folks, we talk to, parents obviously got kids the same ages, and a lot of them are not really, it's the same conversation. Like, what the hell was this? Like, where'd you DoorDashed like $80 last night? Like, what'd you get? And it's like, oh, well, we ordered a pizza and then we had sodas and ice cream or this or that, to the guy. And they don't really keep track, you know, it's, just one of those things where I think when it's their money and they're working and they're writing the bill, then I think they'll pay a little more attention to, a little more attention to it than when it's like mom or dad's credit card and they're just kind of, piling it in because it's on the account. But, those are all teaching moments. Like, really, like, could have driven you to Taco Bell, or if you have the ability to drive, like, you just drive across the street and get it. Like, you don't really need a DoorDash, this type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I DoorDash lunch today because I was back to back all day. So I probably paid $6 more than I needed to for lunch. But, from a time standpoint, it was worth it for me. But no, and I mean, it's a lot of that stuff starts at home and just, talking kids through it, what it means. I started working pretty young, and I think that was kind of one of those things where I don't remember what it was. I think I wanted something one day, and my mom's like, well, if you want it, you got to get a job, spend your own money. And so I started working so I could, frivolously spend my money on things instead of, Bitcoin back then or whatever, which would have been a much better investment than CDs, or I think it was even tapes at the time. But yeah, I mean, it just comes down to, again, another education piece, like explaining to the kids, where does it come from? How do they do it? And then, chores around the house, or I don't know, whatever, different things work for different people. So, I mean, I think there's one size fits all, but figuring out what works for you is always a good part of it. And then, once kids get out in the workforce, I got one working, one can't work yet in North Carolina. And, he's driving back and forth to work, and he's like, man, gas is expensive. Like, yeah, but expensive. So even though it's come down quite a bit, but it's still pretty, I'm sure where you are, it's crazy. It's like 260 here. I don't even know what it's out on the West Coast.
We're in the fours.
Yeah. I saw 7 something in California the other day.
Not crazy.
But yeah, I mean, it kind of starts to hit home then, and he's off to college in the fall. So I think that'll be a bit of a rude awakening, so, but yeah, it's out there. DoorDash, Grubhub, all those things. It's a different mindset. And I mean, you used to have to call the delivery guy and hand them cash, and now you just, couple of clicks and there you go.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you and I kind of represent, I would say, more so the kind of traditional life stage of a banking consumer, right? And for us, I mean, we grew up in a world where we had technology, didn't have technology. I'd say we probably have a decent blend of, knowing what life is like with and without it. And we've seen a lot of the progress and the evolution. But if you think about just who's alive on the planet today, I mean, we have such a crazy wide swath of people and their interactions with technology and financial services. And then the combination of those two things. And so to your point, it's like there's no such thing as one size fits all. And then you start layering in everything from, just financial literacy education on like, hey, you can, but should you, and all of that, to, educating them on fraud and risk and, scams and concerns around that. To, one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about, which is, even things like accessing of capital, right? And you think about, go back really far, and it's like, if I wanted a loan for my, farm to get a few extra cows, like I might actually have the banker come out to the farm and like take a look at the cows and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Or if I wanted a personal loan, they'd come out and they'd see I had a couple of cows and like they'd use that. To now, it's like, I mean, you talk to young kids and, with everything from big loans to BNPL, like they expect instant access to capital digitally. They don't want to jump through any hoops. And so, just loan origination through, I don't know, even the last like 10 years looks night and day different than it used to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to speed, speed to capital, time to yes, time to money in their pocket. And I mean, I think that, most, I think across the generational spectrum, just those are the expectations that were set, that are, set today. And what you hear about and what gets advertised. And it's something that really, to be competitive in the space, you have to be able to do well. That comes down to an easy application process, clear, straightforward, kind of no frills where, I get in, I know what I'm doing, it's intuitive, and you're not asking me questions that I'm not going to be able to answer. We're both old enough to remember all those sort of knowledge-based questions around deposits, like, are you going to do IATs? Are you going to do wires? Like, most customers, they don't really know. Or when they get their direct deposit, you're asking them things they can't possibly, answer, or it's going to be off-putting and they're just going to abandon the application. So a lot of work over the last, probably decade or so, by most institutions has gone into around streamlining that process. And then, using technology to really either craft an experience based on, product type or customer segmentation. And then, getting an answer to yes. And, we all have well, I shouldn't say we all, but, most financial institutions have a really good understanding of their customer base. They know their portfolio, they know what works well. They know where they're strong and they know their market. So, the ones that, I've seen over, the last couple of decades that have really done well, are the ones that have strategies designed to meet, those customer needs. So I've got a customer that comes in, there's a strong FICO, low DTI. We have a relationship with this customer. I don't need to send them through the whole rigmarole, especially if they're an existing customer. They've already been onboarded. They've already gone through KYC. I know who they are. So how can I make this as simple as a process as possible and continue to expand my wallet share? Where on the flip side, if you get a new customer, you're going to do some extra due diligence. You're going to maybe ask them for some, information. And it used to be really hard. And now via, a lot of the technology that's out there, we can go through step-up authentication processes. I can get you to upload tax returns, driver's license, pay stubs, utility bills, all digitally, to continue the application as long as it's engaging, right? Like, so if I can get to a certain point where I can say, hey, Josh, thanks for your application. It's under review. We need a few more pieces of information to make a decision. And then you're putting it back in the customer's hands, to upload it, but you have to, approach that in sort of two separate channels. Like, one, can we do that digitally where you can either just take a picture of it or drag a file or whatever needs to happen to get, the information to the underwriters? Or do I have the option to walk into a branch and depending on who who initiated that transaction, it's, likely one of those two incomes. I might not feel comfortable giving information to you, via an app because, I'm not sure. So I can walk into the branch, but I don't want to have to go through the application again with a branch banker. So you have to provide that pathway where it's also populating the branch network. So I can see, okay, yeah, Josh came in, we're looking for this information. You have it, great. Let me review it, do whatever I need to do in the branch to get that application moving forward. Or it gets uploaded and then automatically there's a trigger that lets the back office know that the loan's ready to be looked at. And, nailing that experience is key. And even within the digital landscape, there's a couple of different avenues there. I mean, you have your straight, I can go to the website, whether it's on my phone, tablet, PC, and apply. Or, do I go in through my online banking? And if I'm already a customer, then why do I have to fill out information if I'm already a customer? So, behind the scenes, there's, as you and I know, there's the whole SSO component and moving the data over and making it secure. You've already been authenticated. But from a customer standpoint,
They don't care.
they don't care. They just don't want to
Yeah.
fill out the application again.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot of it, comes down to, and something that I've talked, in the past about at some conferences is really like meeting the customer where they are. And whether it's a call center, it's in branch, it's online, it's mobile, whatever it is, to be successful in a highly competitive, financial market is to be able to meet the customer where they are and let them bank how they want to bank. But at the same time, you have to keep, security consideration and you need to keep, the fraud consideration. And then, from the financial, geez, brain stopped working on me. But from the financial institution side, you got to be able to track it, right? So like,
Yeah.
where am I doing really well? Why does it take so long? Where's my drop off rate? Like, can I tell if someone's, really anger mashing a button and it's not working because some process is hung up behind the scenes? And then how do we, track that and then refine that experience? And, a lot of times your customers are your biggest source of information there. So we've got, especially some small community banks, they'll run focus groups with their customers. They send out surveys, they have their version of an NPS score, that they'll use for how the experience was. And, when they're negative, a lot of times they'll reach out to those customers and just try and understand what it was. Sometimes it's user error, sometimes it's network, like we were talking about earlier. You happen to live in an area where you've got, gigabit, internet wired in, and yet some folks in rural markets, especially like your ag example at the beginning, where, internet could be spotty out there. They're still on DSL or hopefully not dial up. But they got to get out there and that's a whole nother ball of wax that you have to be able to accommodate. And it creates a very competitive landscape, which is why in the fintech space, you see, a lot of folks that do similar things, and you just have to, make sure from a business standpoint that you're picking the right partner that's going to get you what you want and help you to meet your customers' needs.
Well, and I think, kind of like you were talking about earlier with just the generational gap too, right? You think about banking as a whole. I don't think any of us wants to do this, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I don't sit down and I'm not like excited to interact with my money. I think the only time I am is if I'm spending it. But like,
I'd be more excited about it, but no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if there was more of it, maybe I'd be more excited too. If it wasn't, managing it, if it was trying to figure out how to spend it because I got so much of it, maybe I'd have a different take, but I'm not there. So, none of us wants to do this. So dealing with our finances is kind of an obligatory chore. And I think regardless age or stage in life or any of those things, like we want to try and kind of interact with it with as little as possible. But at the same time, like we have these preconceived expectations of what is, realistic in terms of interacting with my or your, as the institution's, money, right? Mm-hmm. Interacting with my own accounts or getting a loan from you. And yeah, you take somebody like my dad, right? And if you told my dad that if he needed a loan, like he needed to go into a branch, he needed to make an appointment with a branch manager, he needed to explain it, he probably needed to come back 2 or 3 different times with different pieces of documentation, right? And that it could take a couple of weeks, he'd be like, okay. Yeah, that's the process, right? But could you imagine telling like one of your kids that, Law? Yeah. They'd be like, okay, that's great. That's your process. I'm gonna go somewhere else that's got a better process because that process sucks.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, I'm trying to explain to my dad what I do is always like an interesting conversation, right? Concept of cloud-based software didn't really exist. And he's like, yeah, don't you just walk in and like shake the guy's hand and he gives you money? And I'm like, no, that never happens. But yeah, I mean, it does present like some interesting challenges, and it's all about the experience. And I mean, that's really what drives it is, what experience works for you. And I think, in some cases where, ag lending is a great example because there's a lot going on there. And I am by no means even, a novice in ag lending. It wasn't anywhere that I spent any time in, but, talking to folks here that do it and some of our customers here that do it, I mean, it's a really interesting space where they do come out and they look at the cows and they look at the farm and they figure out egg production and all this other stuff. I mean, that is a much different experience than, John Smith needs a credit card and he just wants to like hammer it out online. And, most people today, are incredibly busy. And I mean, you're dialed in 24/7, whether you're at work or you're work in front of a computer or you work a trade or you're in some office or customer service space, like the last thing you want to do is go through an arduous process because you need money. And no one ever goes into a financial institution and says, oh, I'm excited to make this mortgage payment. They're like, I want a house. Like they need somewhere to live. So, it really comes down to how do you help satisfy the customer's need, whatever it is, whether it's a car, it's a house, credit card, loan, debt consolidation, addition, baby, college, all those life events. And they want it to be quick, and they don't want it to be a pain. And to your point, yeah, like, I mean, generationally, some folks might not mind walking in on the branch and kind of getting that done, but I don't know anyone who's got the time to do that today.
Yeah.
The younger, generations, I mean, they're on the go. They're used to doing everything through their phone. They're like a mobile native generation. And if they can't get it on their phone, then they're probably not going to do it.
Yeah. And so then that becomes the challenge, right? Is how do you service both of those equally and meet each of those where they are? And, then kind of going back to what we started by talking about, just some of the like fraud and compliance concerns. You think about, something like originating a loan digitally, and the spectrum of risk tolerance there has got to be massive, right? And where one institution is like, hey, we are all about experience. Let's make it as simple as possible for people to get through this process as fast as possible. We know we're going to take it in the shorts a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to be competitive
Mm-hmm.
to another financial institutions that's like zero. Zero is how much fraud we are willing to accept.
Yeah.
And I don't care if, we're going to expect the person to mail in a blood sample. Like, we will have a zero tolerance for fraud and kind of everything in between.
Yeah.
And then you've got that, huge gamut of different expectations. And then you have the consumer's expectations, trying to mash all that up.
Yeah.
To your point, I don't think there's a silver bullet.
No. And I think that, because of the space that we're in, right? I mean, like, we're aware of a lot of the vendors in the space. And I think, today is certainly better than it was 10 years ago. I mean, there's a lot of services out there that financial institutions can employ to kind of help stymie those things. When you have the folks who are like, we're going to take no risk, and the folks who are like, we don't really care, we just want to get the account, I would probably posit that neither of them are in business today. Because you just can't. You have to kind of go somewhere in between, and it's degrees. And I think where, the advent of technology and the kind of the growing ecosystem out there around fraud and customer verification and, just even like funding account verification, if I'm moving like depository accounts over, has gotten pretty good. And if you really take a look at your existing policies as a financial institution and say, so outside of like the federal regs, but like the institution enforced policies, like, are we set up here to really be competitive in this space? And, we have that conversation a lot with customers where they're like, well, this is how we do stuff. And it's like, cool. But today, your application is like a fillable PDF that gets emailed to somebody in the back. And like, is this really kind of how you want to compete? Because you're not going to be able to compete in this space. And here's why. And I mean, there's, data out there that supports it. Like, for turnaround times, and certain transactions take more than 4 minutes, there's a 15% abandonment rate. But as soon as they get to 8 minutes, there's a 70% abandonment rate. So, I mean, there's empirical evidence out there, that gets done, not, across the board. There's a bunch of consulting companies out there that, put these studies out. And if you look at them and you look at all the, tools really that are in your toolkit to be able to solve that problem, you can still have a great, visual experience for the end user. But you have to back it up, in the back. And a lot of that's driven by, by bank policy. And, you still be compliant with the reg, but, your policy sort of sets forth how you perform as an institution. And if a lot of times, like, if you're like, we got to change our policy, then you got to go change your policy and take a look at it. And there's different ways you can do it. I mean, there's folks that'll do, 20 grand for a great FICO customer. We'll knock that thing out online instantaneously. No problem. Some banks, that's up to 100. Some, it's like anything more than 10 grand, we wanted to go to review. And I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But it's really about establishing that and that pattern and like what you're comfortable with from a risk appetite for a financial institution. And, we saw it a lot in the early days where online applications weren't as prevalent as they are today. And, as they're getting into it, there's a lot of sort of hesitation because it's an unknown space. You hear the horror stories about fraud, customer impersonation, and all those things. And how do we check? And, fraudsters are really good at finding, neobanks online and like spamming them and trying to get through the stuff. I mean, it's really wild. And, just having the right safeguards in place and figuring out how you want to roll it out is key. But I think, kind of the theme here is that if you want to be competitive in the space, in the digital landscape anyway, you need to be able to attract customers, get them in, acquire and maintain wallet share.
Yeah.
And you can do that for a few different ways, but it has to be a great entry into the financial institution. So whether that's in branch, customer service, great call center reps, member service representatives, they're really there, for the mission. They understand, they want to help the customer open their accounts and all that great stuff, or providing a digital, entrance to that financial institution that is quick, easy, compliant. They understand what's going on. They understand next steps. And, it needs to be simple, but simple, as you know, is really hard. Like simple is very hard. And, it's one of those things where you just gotta, fortunately, sometimes you just gotta try it and see what happens, but be able to have the cutoff switch where things start going sideways, you can turn it off. But, I think nowadays, a lot of the institutions are pretty comfortable with online. And, as they look to modernize, they're looking to really supercharge those experiences to allay some of those concerns, mitigate some of those fraud concerns. There's a lot of great tools out there that, really help do that. And some of them allow you to craft like really nice, almost like bespoke experiences behind the scenes where if certain conditions are met, then, hey, we're gonna pause this right here, or we're good to go. Device characteristics are a huge one. Most people are mobile devices. When you opt into a lot of that e-consent stuff, I mean, they're grabbing your device location, and you say you live in Des Moines, Iowa, but somehow you're opening an account and your IP's in Sumatra. Probably a good time to stop that transaction. But no, there's a lot out there. But you're right, and folks are used to. You get to a certain age, you're just kind of used to your routine. It's hard to break people out. So you got to be able to do both.
Well, and like you were saying, the financial institution may also be in a routine that they have to break themselves out of. And it's like, if your internal policies don't support the ability for you to be competitive, then you have to start inward first.
Yeah. And change management is always, so, even going back, years, like whatever sort of project I was working on or transformation we were undertaking, change management is a huge part of it. And really it comes from the executive level down. Hey, this is what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's the value prop behind why we're doing it. We need everybody to get on board. This is what it's going to look like. You've already had your sort of COE, your center of excellence there where, internally, when folks undertake a project, they're bought into why they're doing it, what it's going to do. They've defined the problems that they want to solve. The ones that are like really good at it, they're like, these are our metrics today. These are the metrics that we want to get to. Here's how we're going to track it. And we're just going to, drill this down. And you kind of, explain to your people the why behind these things. Because no project's ever easy. I mean, folks go through core conversions. Like a core conversion is by no means an easy thing. But there's a why behind it. And I think, getting all your folks on board and explaining to them the why and the benefit, and, whether it's to grow, whether it's to modernize, whether it's to be more secure, better, options for integrations or, more successful platform, whatever that might be. The financial institutions that I've worked with that have really taken the time to dive into that and kind of get that buy-in up front, those projects are exponentially more successful than the ones that are just like, hey guys, we're doing this because I said we got to do it. So stack hands and let's go. Works in certain environments, doesn't necessarily work when you have to bring in large groups of stakeholders from across the organization. And the bigger the institution, the more people you got to get involved. And it makes it harder.
That's such a good point. I mean, talk about, you have to be able to define what does success look like for your institution, right? And then be prepared to support that definition of success, right? Like if your financial institution says, let's just keep going down this thread. right? Hey, we only want to add whatever, 10 simple consumer, loans a month.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that's the definition of success, then yeah, you probably don't need some super sophisticated digital solution. And, maybe you're just talking to your account holders as they come in. But if your definition of success is maybe to, grow by 200%, cool. How? And do your policies even support that? No, we have crazy strict limited policies about how we will, originate lending. And so we would never do this or that or this or that. Okay, this is going to be really hard to grow at 200% if any of those things. Or then what if, do you remember the old, I love this as an example of the old, I think it was a UPS commercial for like UPS Business Services. And I think it was a Super Bowl commercial where they, this team of people launched their website and like their new product. And they're all sitting around the computer when they hit launch and it launches and they're all so excited. They're like waiting for a sale to come through and they're like, nothing. And then they get one and they're all like so excited. They're like we got a sale, and then they get two and then they're like, wow, this is awesome, And then all of a sudden it just starts going through the roof and they've got like 1 million sales and they're all kind of looking around each other like, oh crap, we were not prepared for that. Like we're not able to support that. Like how are we supposed to ship all of these out? In the UPS is like, we got you, like we'll do business shipping for you. It's like, so are you prepared for success? So what happens if all of a sudden, you decide you're going to launch, you're going to go from, an older, more antiquated loan origination process to you're going to do a fully digital process. But like you were talking about earlier, we're going to review everything over $10,000. What happens if you're crazy successful? And what if you get 100,000 loan requests for $15,000 loans? And you've got 2 people on your team staff to be able to support review. You're screwed.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's kind of like the dog that caught the car syndrome. You know what I mean? You're always out there chasing it, and then you grab onto the bumper one day, and now you're going for a ride. And I mean, it's a lot. I mean, it's planning. I mean, is really what it is. Like, I mean, understanding where you want to be and how you're going to get there, how you're going to be successful. Where do we need to staff up for this? And then, there's a lot of, exciting stuff out there in the industry that, folks are working on around, how can you use, I don't want to, necessarily dive into the AI topic too much, but, how can you use AI and agentic AI and how can I use that to help me not necessarily solo make decisions, right? Because I think human in the loop is still, a good thing. And then, so how can we really supercharge this and automate and augment as much as possible? But it's also knowing your market, knowing your loan share. I mean, we're all familiar with KYC, KYB, right? And I worked with this guy at FIS who always had these great sayings. This dude, Ron, guy was amazing. I learned a lot from him. And you always just say KYD, know your data, because, banks are data companies. I mean, they are sitting on so much information. So when you're looking to review policies and you're sitting here and saying, we're only going to do $10,000 loans, then you take a look at your loan book and you see that, 70% of your loans are between, 13.5 and, 18.9. Well, then why are you just doing 10,000? Figure out where your happy place is there. Because why are you going to, make this a more arduous process for your customers? Where they like to shop, what they like to do. I mean, the data component of financial institutions, there's a lot there. And, really being able to leverage that will help them make a lot of those decisions. It'll help them plan. It'll help them define success for them. And, really kind of help them, tackle the market in a much more efficient way by understanding, their existing customer base and where they want to grow. You hear them talking about asset sizes a lot. We're $1 billion. We want to grow to $2 billion over the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Well, what does it take to get there? What does your staff look like? What does your market footprint look like? Like, do you have branches there? Do you have the infrastructure for it? Do you have the appropriate call centers? Do you have the right integration? I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And, we've seen some folks be wildly successful in that space. They really put in the pre-work ahead of time and they understand, what's going to get them there. They make the right choices and partnerships. And it's great. I mean, we've seen some fantastic success stories and we're always happy to talk about those and highlight those. But it does come down to a lot of internal due diligence. Do our policies align? All that good stuff. And, but, data-driven decision-making is something that is kind of like a really key element of, transformation projects these days. And, I'm sure you guys see it all the time. Like, what does the data say? And does our policy support it? It's a huge piece.
No, I'm actually really glad you brought that up. I really wanted to talk to you about that. We've talked about kind of the evolution of technology in our industry. And I think we're, in the midst of the next massive revolution in our industry, which is the advent of AI.
Yeah.
And I know this is like the played out buzzword and everybody's talking about it and everybody wants to be, labeled as .ai. And,
Oh yeah.
I'm a huge fan of, unless you can show me a use case of how you're actually using it, it's not AI.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But to your point, right, know your data.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem is that financial institutions are sitting on so much data.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very difficult to be able to comb through all of it and put cohesive pictures together.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then be able to do that at scale and be able to do that with the level of sophistication that, a human would. Like if you are sitting down there and you're a loan officer at a credit union and, I'm a member who's been a member for 20 years and I come in, like you've got this whole wealth of knowledge and understanding about me that could impact, your decision for that loan offering outside of just my FICO score.
Yeah.
Right. But how do you scale that? How do you replicate that? How do you do that with fairness? And this is absolutely an area that I think AI has a huge use case for.
Yeah.
Right? Is being able to comb through all of that data and turn it into something that normal people can use.
Yeah.
Right. And this stuff is like, I still talk to people, Law, that like, I'll make the bold statement. Like if you're sitting there thinking, well, AI, maybe it's coming, maybe there's some things it can do. Like, no, friend. I'm sorry, but you missed the boat. Like you've got to start interacting with this stuff because it is far further along than you think it is.
Oh yeah.
I mean, literally, we were just talking before the podcast, right? So I built my wife some big old raised garden beds for Mother's Day. Mm-hmm. And I'm not kidding, Law. Like she maybe about 3 months ago or so was kind of anti using any of the AIs, the chat GPTs or Geminis or any of that. Yeah. And I've really been pushing her to start using it more for stuff. I'm like, honey, just treat it like your personal assistant, right?
Yeah.
And so literally, Law, what she ended up doing was she took a picture of garden boxes. She told it the measurements. She put in a list of all of the different things that she wanted to grow. And she said, plan it out for me. And then just had a conversation with it. Mm-hmm. Understood where we're located, how much water we get, how much sunshine. Was it north facing, west facing, east facing? Like what time of the year did she want to grow things in? Okay, do these things, but you need to have the peppers away from this thing because it'll impact this. Planned it all out. And then she was like, oh, this is great. Now I need to just draw a picture of it or something. I was like, no, babe, just literally tell it to draw the picture for you. And it literally drew her a beautiful schematic and all of this, right? So, and mind you, this is going through, umpteen million data sources, crossing form factors from going from a list to uploading a picture to taking a diagram, right? So think about that in the mindset of your financial institution, right? Instead of sitting there and trying to go, hey, I want to grow all of these different vegetables and different things. I need to go talk to a master gardener, and I specifically need to talk to somebody who's, lived in Portland, Oregon and knows what our climate's like and what grows well here, right? Same kind of thing. Instead of having to go, oh, well, I have to talk to somebody who's been in our loan department for 20 years, who really understands all of this. And say, hey, look, here's a really big pile of very complex data. Make sense of it. And we are absolutely at the point in time where we can make sense of that data really easily. And then your executive team can just ask questions of the data. Like you were saying, hey, actually, we're just really curious. We're thinking about changing the policy on, our limit being $10,000, but where's our average loan portfolio? Bam, data tells you, hey, actually, it's between 13.5 and 18.9. Oh, okay, that informs something about our decision-making process that we need to do, right? Yeah. So I think that's going to be something that's going to radically change how financial institutions look at the data that supports what they do in decision making for loan origination.
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's I mean, it's stuff we do, it's stuff we're working on, it's stuff we talk to, customers about, here. We have the privilege of having some very, large enterprise customers, top 5 bank customers, and hearing about, some of the things that they're working on with AI. And a lot of it is just that. If you think about it in a bank, financial institution standpoint, there's not a lot of data that's going out there I mean, it might be unstructured, but it's not untagged, right? Like, what it is. It's a debit, it's a credit, it's a charge, it's cash, it's non-cash, it's check, it's a payment, it's a reversal, it's a fee. I mean, you have a lot of that data, and, getting it into a place where you can interrogate it is key. And as opposed to just saying, hey, here's my policy, or here's my question, you can actually upload your whole policy and then refer it back to the policy to say, hey, show me these things based on my policy. Like, where are we at? I mean, it's gotten to the point now where, uploading documentation and using that as a touchstone for the interrogation of the data is totally plausible. And it's really interesting, what's out there, and not just from the generative part of it where, hey, tell me this or tell me that. I mean, we can use it to create credit memos for commercial customers where it's grabbing all their transactions, all their information, and generating the memo for you. Then you can go in, take a look at it and say, yeah, this looks accurate. This doesn't look accurate. Maybe you also want to have it reach out and get some information, not only about the business, but you also want to understand, the industry and the landscape and the financial outlook for that landscape. You think about all the stuff going on right now with tariffs and manufacturing, and what are some implications there that we need to be thinking about? And a lot of it can go out and do it for you. Then you can also ask it, like, where it made stuff up or where it kind of inferred or, hallucinated the information. And it'll come back and say, yeah, I kind of drew some conclusions here. I'm not really sure, if this is accurate or not. But when you think about the swaths of data that are on there, especially you've got some of these, old school on-prem database systems that, have been operating for, ever. You got, someone in the basement who keeps them running. You dump all that data into some sort of, actionable source, some S3 bucket, you run it through Claude, you start interrogating it for what you're looking for. And I mean, it's really fascinating, the insights that you can get out of that. And when you start then comparing it or benchmarking it to some of the other industry data that's out there, if you can capture it and you can, measure it, then you can use that as an inference point, for what success looks like where you're doing well, where you're not doing. I mean, even down to the point of, certain, branch performance, like, why is this thing taking so long? I mean, even at, when I had started, Bank of America back in the day, I mean, they had guidelines for how long it took tellers to do certain transactions. So like a check deposit should take, I remember what it was, 30 seconds or 48 seconds or something like that. And that's kind of how they benchmarked all that transaction. So like, cash check deposit with cash, cash deposit with change, or, whatever it is. They had all these metrics. So, I mean, they have them, they use them today. I mean, it's how they manage performance at branches. It's, call center times. How long is somebody on wait? Did you resolve their question? Like, how many times do they have to call back about the same thing? And then just all the transactional data. And I mean, that's all fed into BSA systems today. I mean, it comes in for, money, wires in, wires out, cash in, cash out, checks in, checks out. And then, you have all the data. Where is it going? You can definitely capture it. And I mean, it's something that, there's a few that are out there that have really embraced it, and they're diving into the AI and sort of the interrogation powers of something like that. Where before you got to sort through, reams of data, tons of spreadsheets, or you're using some visualization tool that, is great, right? Like, it's giving you information, but is it looking at the whole body of information? Can you narrow it down? Can you be like, yeah, I want to understand why in this zip code, people who live in this zip code are higher loan amounts. And, maybe that comes down to, different information. Then you can cross-reference that with, appraisals. You can look at salary reports. I mean, there's so much out there that you can do. And really kind of, understanding that your data is sort of the underpinnings of your institution. And if you use it, really well, and you have some folks, there's nothing wrong with hiring a couple of data scientists, getting them out there and, digging into the data. I think it was, Goldman pushed out something a couple months ago that was like, we can now get an S1 done in, I think it was like a day, for like an IPO where it used to take a couple of weeks or a couple of months to put it together. There's like something like 42,000 people on staff. So David Solomon put this thing out. I think it was on LinkedIn. I don't remember exactly, but it was like, they have 42,000 people at the company. 10,000 of them are data scientists and engineers. And the way they've been able to just sort of, use some of these new tools to, think about an S1 filing. I mean, that's a insane amount of work and due diligence and prep that needs to go into it. And you're doing, I think said 95% of it in like 24, 48 hours or something like that.
Nuts.
So I mean, there's no reason why institutions can't do the same thing. It's your data, you own it, dive in, pick the right infrastructure for it. And I mean, that's really going to be the driving thing going forward, because you can use it for all different stuff, HubSpot, marketing, insights, targeted offers. There's a survey, I think it was last year, they said 40% of consumers that received an offer in the mail was for a product or service that they either had no interest in or weren't qualified for. So something like, I live in an apartment, but you're sending me a mortgage refi or a HELOC offering. Like, I can't do anything with that. But, if you have the right data, you should know that, Josh lives in Manhattan and he doesn't own, he rents, and his rent is this much because this is what you picked up from a loan application. So where does that data go in, in your system to be able to use that to target offers? And AI is a great use case for that. And, you can get a lot out there. And then there's a lot you can do between, business process automation and, starting to delve into a little newer on the AI front, but, diving into some of the agentic options that are out there where it can, trigger an action, wait for a response, trigger the next action, wait for a response, trigger the next action, wait for a response. And depending on, the response trees and the decisions, can, get you to, hey, recommended approved for this loan amount based on these things, or a review. And it's really interesting. And I think that, understand the skepticism. We all grew up with, Terminator and, Skynet and, all these things are coming to take over the world. And I mean, who knows, maybe one day. Right. But, I think for now, I mean, if you're not really kind of getting into that now, or at least from like a exploratory, project or cross conversation, you're going to have to really, really soon. You're going to get blind. And there's a lot of folks out there that'll help you come and do it. I mean, so there is some technical chops required, and, not all institutions can kind of staff those people. They're not cheap. They're really smart. They're in high demand. But there's services out. There's a lot of system integration partners out there. Your big fours, that have shops that can kind of help you come in and do all this stuff and get sort of the process in place for it. And it's a huge opportunity to not only kind of understand your customer better, but understand your bank better, and start to see if you're really. I was at a conference last week. I was over the bank director exec summit. Great conference, first sort of inaugural conference for them. They do AOBA and they do a bunch of other ones, but this is sort of their first one that was sort of for bank executives talking about common themes in the market. And they were talking about, there's a conversation around sort of the M&A space. And, so the acquiring bank had hired some attorneys to come in. They're like, well, what is your bank? Like, what is your core strength? What is your competency? And they didn't say who the bank was or whatever, but they're like, oh, well, we're a community bank, and we are, focused on our, individual consumers, so people, not businesses. And, here's how we think about ourselves. This is what we do in the community. And then they dug into the data, and they're like, well, actually, like, you guys are like 70% small businesses, sole prop, single member LLCs. You have very few consumer loans. And for your customers that are consumers, they've got 1-2 products with you, credit card, car loan. So you're not really a consumer bank. You're really a small business bank. And if you look at the data, this is like, it's like looking at that data, and it's a conundrum even in the credit union space, right? The great rates, I've been a member of a credit union for a very long time, and I'm very happy with them. But a lot of them, especially because they're so heavy in indirect lending, it's $5 for your share certificate. So I get my car loan, I give you $5, I pay off my car loan, and I'm done.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of data out there. I mean, there's reports, there's information. You've got my credit report, when I applied for a car, for my car loan and all these other things. Using that data to really gain more wallet share from that customer is a huge opportunity. And you've got the data to do it, but you just have to be able to look at it and action against it. And that immediately comes down to a human capital conversation. Well, I don't have 100 people, sitting downstairs who can start going through all this stuff. Like, you really only need, one or two guys and a laptop, and you can
Yeah.
get all that information. And if you're not really, diving into that today, like you're going to get, left behind.
That's it. I think, AI is about velocity, and it's about velocity for you or your competition, but it itself is about velocity. I mean, you think about just what was major transformation in lending from 100 years ago to very recently, going from paper to digital, right? And that took forever for that transition to happen.
Yeah.
But you think about just how we went from kind of talking about AI to some people doing some really cool stuff in lending with AI in just a few short years. But then you think about just how much better it gets and how fast it gets. So going back to that example, Law, of my wife using it last night to plan out her garden, she was literally working on it. And she was like, "Oh, I can't get it to do this." And I was like, "Oh no, it'll 1,000% do that." She's like, "No, it won't." And I was like, "Give me your phone." I was like, "What version of ChatGPT are you on?" I was like, "Oh, you're on one model ago, from literally not even that long ago."
Yeah.
I was like, "Here, switch to the new model." I switched her to the new model and it ran it.
Yeah.
Right. That's the velocity at which this is happening. So, it's not even just about that AI, if you are not using it, but your competitor is using it, it's not just that it's going to make them faster. It puts them on the treadmill that's moving faster and accelerating faster too. So it becomes a hockey stick, because all of a sudden, what they're able to do today may be marginally better than what you're able to do, but tomorrow it's going to be even more. And then tomorrow it's going to be even more. It's exponential growth.
Yeah. I mean, just the models themselves, I think of it a lot like, when people still used to get checks, right? It was a lot of checks. Remember, grandmother sends you $1 more than whatever your birthday was. You're 10, you get a check for $11. You got to walk to the bank, you got to deposit it, maybe out of like a passbook savings or something like that, right? Total pain. And then, check 21 comes out, you can just take a picture of it. Now you can do sort of, remote deposit capture for consumers outside of the small business space. Total game changer, for a lot of folks, because they don't have to go in, go out. Models got great, recognition gets good. A lot of them pull the amount in for you, less for you have to fill out. And I mean, there was definitely folks that, were like, my other bank does this. Why don't you do that? Like, it's a convenience thing for me.
Yep.
Because it makes my life better. So how does, sitting on all this great data that you're not really interrogating and leveraging can make your customers' lives even better? I mean, you start thinking about, modeling out, I see Josh went to Lowe's, Home Depot, or wherever you want to get all your stuff. You picked up, spent some money there, maybe spent some money there last week, maybe spent some money there a couple weeks ago. That's a reasonable inference. Maybe you're doing some work around the house. I mean, should I target you for a HELOC? And then if you think about the folks, I mean, we talk a lot about just your sort of general, consumers, but if you think about applying that to the wealth space and the information that they have there, I mean, that's a whole different level of starting to look at, those wealth portfolios and what's in there. And I see this person's doing this, and this is up for renewal. You've got some complex trusts. You've got, these things going on. And, from a transactional standpoint, I mean, there's a lot you can do with that, whether it's tax deferments or purchases or, whatever you need to do to kind of make that, a more beneficial relationship. You've got investments somewhere else. I know what the book is. It can do a lot for you in a short period of time. And, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with it the immediate sort of knee-jerk reaction is like, well, AI is going to take my job. And it's like, I don't think that we're really, at least in the financial space, we're at a point where you're going to have a bank that's totally run by an AI. One, just from a regulatory standpoint, I think that's a no-go. But two, because to our kind of our earliest conversation here is like, we're talking about, people's money, something that
Yeah.
they're deeply passionate about.
Yeah.
And they're going to be suspect if there's not a human in the loop or someone that they can go and talk to. No matter how good those chat, voices have gotten. I was playing around with, sort of the voice thing on Chat GPT, and you can have full on conversations with it. And it's really interesting, but you can also throw in some curveballs and it just kind of keeps running with it. Like, I don't know, I forget exactly how it transpired, but it said something, and I think I said something. It's like, what was that? And I was like, oh no, I was just talking to my, to my pet. And I was like, oh, what type of pet do you have? And I was like, oh, this will be interesting. So I told it I had Smurfs. So it started just asking me about the Smurfs. And it's like, oh, well, what's that? It's like, clearly, like, they're not a real thing. And they have a pretty kind of interesting origin if you go back into like the German fairy tale stuff. But it's a really interesting thing, and it just kind of ran with it like they were a real creature. So it wasn't like, oh, like the cartoon character. It was just like, oh no, like, yeah, you've got Smurfs at home.
That's hilarious.
But I mean, the language, even pitching in the different languages, and it's I've been a lot of places. I've picked up a smattering of languages, and you can switch languages, and it'll keep going right with you in real time. It's wild, and I think you probably saw comments from Zuckerberg at the conference he was at last week, where he really thinks kind of like voice AI is going to be the next sort of way people start interacting with it. And it could be, I mean, natural language, you can have conversations with it. I don't know how, likely that is inside of the four walls of a branch, right? Because you're talking about, personal information that,
Yeah.
probably want to repeat that out too loud, normally that's why you've got the cubes. But, it's certainly going there. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in the market. You start thinking about some of the large sort of conference providers, how they use AI. I mean, we use one for our conference calls here at Works, and there's like an AI agent that sits on there and just basically transcripts it. It does takeaways. If everyone's dialed in from different lines like we are, it'll say, Josh said, Law said, Josh said, Law said. What gets really funky is when you call in from a conference room and there's 10 people in it. It's, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Which fair enough, right? But I mean, it really is a very powerful tool. And I think, 2-3 years ago when ChatGPT was really catching on, there's a lot of, can't really do that. And the model's really funky. But I mean, some of the new stuff, like I've been playing around with Claude 3.7, and I mean, the deep research on that. And I mean, it is pretty wild.
It's super impressive, man.
Yeah.
I mean, just the number of things that you can accomplish through it and the time savings that it will have. I think that makes, my point on this is, like you were saying, AI is not going to take your job. But someone who's using AI when you're not will take your job.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're going to be 100 times more effective and efficient than you are.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But I can crank out way more than I did even just a few years ago because of AI.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just the research alone, and now you get tagging back, which is really funny having kids sort of, in high school, they're doing research projects and they're using, ChatGPT to kind of help, not write the paper for them, but to help, do the research, and it comes back, it'll give you a bibliography, it'll cite sources, you can kind of go in, it's really, it had the old MLA, spiral bounds, how to write an APA or MLA for, you're citing your sources and all this type of stuff. You don't need to do any of that anymore. It's in there. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see where it goes. I think there's a lot of good stuff coming out of it. And I think, the financial industry is right to be, cautious, right? Because I mean, you're dealing with personal information, you got to get a firewalled model. You can't be dumping it out in the sort of the open models, just where if you just go to chatgpt.com and dump your information in there, you got to get a firewalled one and go through all your due diligence and vendor selection, all those things that go along with it. But, yeah, I mean, it is something that, people need to learn. I encourage my kids to learn. I mean, I got my parents in there, they're in their 70s. I'm like, you can go and ask this thing questions, and, gave them my account login, or just log in, ask your questions, not to my work one, to my personal one. And, just have them go in and check it out. And I mean, it's really fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, just to see how prevalent it's become. A great example. I have a guy on my team who is, I mean, one, he's just brilliant. He's a younger guy and he's full in on data and tech. And so he's a massive power user internally of using AI tools for productivity and our data analysis. And his girlfriend just graduated actually from North Carolina,
Nice.
nursing school.
Great school.
Yeah. And so graduation was this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was messaging him this morning. I was like, hey, how was your weekend? How was her graduation and all of this? And he's like, oh, it was awesome. He's like, it drug on forever. He's like, because everybody had a speech.
Oh.
And he's like, I could tell 99% of speeches were written by ChatGPT.
Yeah. We got an email the other day that said there was an email, the body was fine, but at the top it was write this email in a warm business context. And it just
Epic.
the whole thing. I emailed back. I said, hey man, I'm glad you're using ChatGPT or whatever you're using to write these things for you. But in the future, you might want to take that top tag along all the email. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's such a good element of that too. I mean, that's one of the things that, we talk a lot about in our utilization of AI for our, use cases is you validate.
Yeah.
Right. Because it is not perfect, just like a human. Right. And, even in stuff that you would think it should be absolutely spot on, like sometimes it will tell you 1 + 1 is 3.
Yeah.
And if you just never validate it and you look at it, then you shoot an email out that says 1 + 1 is 3.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or that gets plugged into your computational model, or that gets, used in whatever scenario.
Yeah.
And so you got to validate that stuff. And it's not that it's doing 100% of the work for you, but like you were saying, for Goldman, maybe it gets you 90% of the way there.
Yeah.
You still have to do the 10%.
Oh yeah.
And you still have to know what the hell you're doing to finish out the 10%. So that's where subject matter expertise comes in is, sometimes a great case in point, one of the things that I love to use, I use Google Enterprise Gemini at work. And one of the things I love using it for is things like contract review. It's phenomenal at legal language.
Yeah.
Right. But at the end of the day, I am not an attorney.
Right.
Right. So I'm only so good at validating it. And there are certain times where I'm like, hey, I've got to send this over to, corporate legal counsel and be like, hey, I need you to review this because I am ill-equipped to do it. But hey, I got this thing 90% of the way there. Right. But if I just trusted it 100% of the time, there's absolutely things that would be wrong in those contracts.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, the folks that are really good in their industries, so a lot of developers will use it. There's tools out there that help them write code. They'll write test cases for it. It'll kind of do the whole thing. But if you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know what's wrong with it. And that's why it's really important to have, get your folks skilled up, have the right folks and, that are jumping in on it. And, it's a great tool. It really is. But you gotta know what you're looking at. I've asked it some questions that are like, ooh, that's a weird, like, I don't think that would really fly, but okay. Like, you start asking it why it thinks that way. And, it only knows what it knows. Right. And but to your point, every 3-6 months, the models that come out it's not like, oh, it's incrementally better. They're exponentially better.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just it. Like it's about that velocity. It is not just a little bit better. It is like mind-blowingly better every time.
It's wild.
Yeah. It's like, a baby comes out and you're like, oh, it can't walk. And then, it learns to walk and then it slowly learns to talk. And you watch that natural progression, but it's like, man, with AI, it comes out and then it goes from crying to walking. And then all of a sudden it goes not from walking, but to being able to fly an F-35.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, we skipped running.
Yeah.
Like we just went straight to fly an F-35. It's like, this is crazy.
We have our guy here who's sort of like our head of data and AI. He talks about it sort of in two models. He's like, you kind of have your MBA model, which is like a good model for like business context and stuff like that. And then you have your PhD model, and your PhD model is really the one where like it's doing deep research, it's picking up information. And he's like, that model is getting so much better every time, where it's really like it's hard to quantify for him. And very smart guy, he's very in the AI space. And he's like, it really is just mind blowing, release after release, how much better this stuff got. What was that big joke about, like Will Smith eating spaghetti on the video? You can go back and look at it. So a couple of years ago, I think they asked ChatGPT to make a video of Will Smith eating spaghetti, and it was just crazy. He was like sticking it in like his cheek, and like the spaghetti was flying all over his head. Like it didn't look anything remotely like a human eating spaghetti. And then they did the compare and contrast with the new models with Will Smith, and it looked like Will Smith was just sitting down eating spaghetti. I mean, it's a really interesting.
That's crazy.
Because you think about, I mean, it sounds straightforward, but the complexities of the hand, the hand and the mouth and the movement and the alignment and all that other stuff, very interesting. Well, and I think I was kind of coming back, like, FIs that are really, serious about being competitive, it gives them a competitive edge. If used appropriately and responsibly, and there's certainly governance out there for how to do that. So I think that it's there. It's a pretty low barrier to entry. And it's a super powerful tool. So I don't know why you wouldn't jump into it at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Law, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
I think, like we were talking about at the beginning, it's like, you've got kind of this breadth of expertise in the industry. I kind of had no idea where we were going to go. And what's funny is we've never even talked about AI in the first place. And here we spent the last like 40 minutes talking about it. But, well, hey, listen, before I let you go, I got 2 final questions for you, sir.
Sure.
So first off, where do you go to get information about what's happening in the industry? Any interesting sources you use?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we have, here it is, we have the, sort of availability of a couple of partners in the space, that we can leverage for some stuff. So, we lean on them a little bit to give us some industry reports that we subscribe to. Sometimes we get to participate into. There's a great blog called like FinTech Brain Food. I don't know if you've ever jumped on that one. Super interesting.
Let's check it out.
Yeah, a lot that's out there. Industry events are always a good one to figure out, what's going on. I love a lot of the bank director ones. The ABA Digital Banker is a great one to hear some stuff. A very large and in the best way, grueling conferences. If you get out to Money 2020, the topics are great. It's very well run. I mean, it is an enormous conference though. I think it's like 16,000 people every time you go. And you learn a lot. There's some great presenters out there that are doing some very cool stuff, totally digestible 20, 30, 40 minute, sessions that you can go to. And then we actually have a guy here who built a agentic AI version of an intranet tool that is incredibly cool. And he basically just has all these agents that comb the internet for information for articles about AI, inclusive of release notes from ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, everything, and just puts them into a spot, and you can read all that stuff. And then, really interacting with the customers as frequently as I do, you get to really kind of hear what's on their minds. And we have a great marketing team here. We have a great product marketing team here. And, when something kind of comes up, piques my interest, I can, just kind of shoot them an email and say, hey, this topic's come up. Like, what can you tell me? And whether we're reaching out to, some of our, consulting partners, like Datos and those guys, and start to get some reports coming into us, and be able to ingest it. And then, I like to read. I'm not as efficient as reading as I once was. I read this statistic that was something like 60%, 70% of adults don't pick up a book after college.
Crazy.
And I thought that was kind of depressing. So I have all these books at home that I have yet to read, finish reading, but I did break down and buy a Kindle because I was talking to a coworker here, and she's a voracious reader. And she's like, it's great. I spend a lot of time on planes. I spend a lot of time in hotels. So it's great to be able to flip through and read it. I'm reading through The One Thing right now, which is a super interesting take on how, like, if you focus on like this one thing, that's really gonna, it's got to be the right thing, of course, and it's not always the right thing, but if one thing is going to get you 80% of value out of it, that's what you have to focus on. And it's really, really interesting. Measure What Matters is another great book that's just kind of generally, sort of out there. But there's a lot of industry events that we have the opportunity to go to, and they can be really informative. I get to speak at some of them, which I'm sure is dreadful for the audience, but I get to also attend some, and they're really interesting to kind of hear where they're at, and you get the ones that are like sort of the mixed topic conferences where it's more like on the industry trends. Super interesting. You get to these great industry things, and you start to hear stuff. I think probably one of the Money 2020 a couple years ago, MasterCard gave this fantastic speech about how for everything else there's MasterCard logo, or sort of saying, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That they came across, and like what it's done for them and how they're using it. And I mean, it was really interesting because it's
cool.
not something you really, kind of think about. And, tapping into the consumer psyche is a really, hard thing to do. I mean, that's why Mad Men was so successful, right? Like, I mean, other than the intrigue in the show, but, sort of the big ad agencies, Madison Avenue, 50s, 60s. And there's a lot. So I think, in this industry, there's not like one source you can go to and kind of get everything. It'd be great if there was, but there's so many different opinions out there. And oh my Lord. And then, having different banks, different areas of focus and all these other things that come up. There's not a single source for it. And different folks are, credit union, think about it, has a vastly different mission, in that space than your community banks do. And a lot of the spirit aligns and the intent aligns, but what they're really after and what their customer base is and what they're trying to do for the community is different. So you kind of really need to get out and sort of see everything as much as you can. And, it kind of comes back to in this industry, even though there's a lot and it's pretty hyper-focused, you still got to be like a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
And understand what matters to your customers, whether that's, financial institutions or, actual, humans.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, there's so much going on, and there's so many different, unique ideas and perspectives on it. It is good to get a good swath of it. Yeah. Well, if people want to connect with you, or if they want to learn a little bit more about nCino and what you guys are doing, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can certainly reach out to me there. I probably spend more time on that than I should, typically late at night. But it's a good way to keep in touch. So I'm pretty sure I'm the only Law Helie on LinkedIn. If you find another, let me know. I actually did find another guy on there once whose first name was Law. I reached out to him. He did not reply. So if he's
sad.
Reply to my message, man. I'd love to know how you got your first name. I know how I got mine, so I'm just kind of curious. And if you want to learn more about nCino, you can just go to nCino.com. Check us out. We've got a great website, been around for 14 years. Things really built out. Team's done a great job there. It talks all about our product and services. I'll be at the ABA Digital Conference here in Boca the first week of June. If anyone's down there, come by, say hi. And we're here.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for taking some time. This ended up being a really awesome episode, man. We had recorded, goodness, an hour and 41 minutes now. It's crazy how time flies when you're
You should get hazard pay. Yeah. No.
I should get hazard pay. That's awesome. I might take that down as a note.
Yeah.
No, seriously, this has been an absolute blast. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and hear a little bit about your unique ideas and perspectives on the industry. So thanks for coming and being a guest on the Digital Banking Podcast, Law.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you taking the time, and opportunity to talk was great.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Banking Podcast, powered by Typhone. Find more episodes on digitalbankingpodcast.com or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.